You're not going to believe what the HOA tried to pull on me. I live on a peaceful ranch, quiet and tucked away, with more acres than I could ever use. It's been in my name for years, solid land, no mortgage, no nonsense. Just me, the open fields, my workshop, and the quiet hum of the countryside. Then out of nowhere, this HOA from a nearby neighborhood starts acting like they run the place. I wasn't even aware of them until one of their board members walked right up to my gate and started asking questions, real bold. He had this clipboard in his hand and a little badge hanging from his polo shirt like he was somebody official. Said he was doing a routine neighborhood compliance check. I just stared at him. I told him, "This ain't your neighborhood. You're standing on private ranch land." He looked around, a bit confused, then kind of smiled, like I was the one who didn't get it. He told me they've been keeping an eye on my place for a while now. That's when I raised an eyebrow. Apparently, they didn't like the view of my barn from their newly built subdivision. Said it was bringing down the property value of the homes behind me. Imagine that. I shrugged it off and went about my day. I figured it was just some overeager volunteer trying to flex his little bit of fake power. But it didn't stop there. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. An official-looking envelope. HOA letterhead. Inside, they wrote a whole page about how my land was non-compliant with community standards. They even included a list of things they thought I should correct immediately. Things like repainting the barn, removing excess vehicles, and, get this, consider relocating livestock away from view of residential homes. I read that part twice just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. I sat on my porch with that letter and just laughed. First of all, I don't even belong to their HOA. Second, my ranch was here long before their little cookie-cutter homes popped up. Still, I figured maybe it was just a misunderstanding. I drafted a polite letter back, kindly letting them know I'm not part of their HOA, their rules don't apply to my property, and I'd appreciate it if they left me alone. 2 days later, they showed up again. This time, 3 of them. 2 men and a woman, all wearing matching shirts, clipboards in hand. They didn't even knock, just started taking pictures from outside the gate. One even tried to lean over and snap a photo of my work truck. I walked out and asked them what they thought they were doing. The woman said they were gathering documentation. I told her to get off my land before I called the sheriff. She smirked, said they already had a legal route in progress. And then they hit me with it. They wanted to buy my ranch. Not at market value. They offered me a joke of a price, less than half of what the land is worth. Said it would benefit the community if the land could be turned into green space or common facilities. At that point, I realized this wasn't just some mistake or neighborhood gossip. They really thought they could pressure me into selling. And when I declined, firmly this time, things took a turn. The next morning, I had 2 sheriff's deputies at my front gate. They looked embarrassed just being there. One of them said, "Sir, we got a call from the HOA about a possible land dispute. They said you were occupying their property and refusing to vacate." I couldn't believe it. I pulled out my file box, handed them the original deed, the updated survey maps, even the county zoning paperwork. Everything clearly showed the ranch boundaries. All legally mine. The deputies nodded. They said, "Sorry to bother you. We'll mark this resolved." But I knew what the HOA had tried to do. They didn't just try to push me around, they tried to paint me as some squatter on my own land. And that's when I knew it was time to stop playing nice. Because what they didn't know, what none of them realized, was that I had a little secret of my own. One that was about to flip this whole story on its head. I didn't tell anyone right away, but I had been holding on to a little card up my sleeve for years. See, back when the original developer of that neighborhood went bankrupt, their land rights and leases went up for grabs. I was looking for an investment at the time, and the offer came cheap. Real cheap. So I bought it. Not the houses, of course. Just the land underneath their neatly lined homes, their walking trails, and even their shiny little clubhouse. They didn't know it, but they were paying rent through a holding company that I quietly owned. Every single lot in that subdivision? It sat on ground I legally controlled. And the HOA? They didn't even think to look into the fine print of their own agreements. But I never used that information against them. I let them live in peace. paid their lease, followed the terms, no problems. I was the kind of landlord who didn't interfere as long as the check cleared. They had no clue. Still, after that stunt with the sheriff, I was done being polite. The next week, I received another envelope. Thicker this time. Inside were documents, with words like cease and desist, property encroachment, and legal review. It was laughable. They had hired an attorney to try and bully me off my own land. They even included more complaints, this time about the noise of my tractor, the way my driveway looked, and, I kid you not, the smell of my horses. That's when I decided to remind them exactly where they stood. I contacted my attorney and had him draft a formal notice. It was written in the clearest legal language possible. We cited the land lease agreement they were bound by, highlighted their breach of terms by trespassing and harassment, and gave them a 60-day notice to cure their violations or face termination of their land lease. Basically, if they didn't back off and fix their behavior, they'd be breaking the terms of the agreement that allowed their homes to legally exist on my land. The response was fast. 3 days later, the HOA president called my attorney. Not even an email, a full-on panic call. He tried to apologize, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that the previous board members were overzealous and didn't understand the situation. But it was too late for soft talk. I had been patient. I had stayed quiet. I gave them more chances than they deserved. And instead of appreciating that, they had sent cops to my property and tried to humiliate me. So I made my next move. I had a property assessor come out and review the neighborhood lease rates. With the market changes and new zoning laws, I had every legal right to raise the land lease. And that's exactly what I did. I tripled it. Suddenly, the HOA was looking at a massive increase in their monthly dues. Panic swept through their board. Homeowners were demanding answers. Some even knocked on my gate, trying to talk to me directly. I didn't respond. I let the paperwork speak for itself. Behind the scenes, they tried to threaten me with more lawyers. They claimed I was being unreasonable. But everything I did was by the book. Every notice, every deadline, every new lease rate, it was all within the terms they had agreed to when they moved in. They just never thought anyone would actually enforce it. The pressure started showing. I heard from someone at the county office that the HOA was scrambling to find loopholes, alternatives, even ways to relocate their community center off my land. But they couldn't. They were locked in. Every paved road, every mailbox, every playground set in their neighborhood, it all sat on my soil. They didn't own a square inch of it underneath. And now, thanks to their own arrogance, they had woken up the landowner they thought was just a quiet old rancher with a barn they didn't like. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a shovel. They wanted to force me out, to push me off the land I've lived on for years, and now they were paying me just to keep their home standing. And trust me, things were just starting to get interesting. After the lease hike took effect, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but word travels fast in small communities, especially when folks start pointing fingers. Some of the homeowners had no clue they were sitting on land they didn't technically own. Others were furious that the HOA had picked a fight without knowing who they were up against. A few even came by my property, trying to talk things out, but I wasn't interested in small talk. Then came the second visit from the sheriff. Same deputy as before, but this time, no tension in the air. He leaned on the gate and said, "You're not gonna believe this," but they called again. Claimed you were blocking neighborhood access. I asked him, "Blocking what access?" "There's a 1/4 mile of trees between us." He shrugged. "Yeah, I know. But they're saying you put up a new fence and are trying to trap them in." That was a lie, of course. The only fence I'd touched in months was on the far side of my livestock pasture. Nowhere near their walking paths or access roads. But they were desperate. They'd gone from pushy to petty in record time. So I invited the deputy to come take a walk. We strolled right to the fence in question. All brand new cedar, solid posts, and not even within eyesight of the subdivision. He laughed, shook his head, and said, "I'm filing this one under nuisance call. They're wasting our time now." After he left, I finally started talking. I went down to the county land office and requested public notice privileges on their lease agreement. That meant if they ever tried to sell or refinance, I'd be notified first. And I wasn't just doing it to scare them. I was making sure they couldn't make any big moves without me knowing. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I attended their next HOA meeting. They didn't see me coming. I walked into that stuffy little community center with a manila folder under my arm and a cup of black coffee in my hand. You could hear the chairs creak when folks turned to look. One of the board members, the same guy who first came to my gate, looked like he'd seen a ghost. The president cleared his throat and asked what brought me there. I told them plainly, since I'm the landowner and you're all using it under contract, I figured I'd stop by and hear how you're handling your end of the deal. A few people chuckled nervously. One older gentleman stood up and asked if it was true, if their homes really sat on land that wasn't theirs. I pulled out the folder and handed him a copy of the original development lease, stamped and recorded. It's all here, I said. Been that way since your neighborhood went up. Your HOA signed the dotted line before the first house was ever built. Dead silence followed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anyone. I just told them how things stood. You called the cops on me. Accused me of things I didn't do. Tried to intimidate me. But I've got news for you. Every letter, every photo, every complaint you filed, that was all done while living on land I own. I could see the panic setting in. A few board members whispered to each other. The treasurer asked if there was any way to reduce the lease again. I said, there might have been once. But we're past that now. One lady asked why I never told them before. I smiled and said, because I didn't need to. I never bothered anyone until someone bothered me. When I walked out of that meeting, I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. They knew they'd messed with the wrong person. Back on my ranch, everything felt quieter than usual. The phone didn't ring. No more letters. No more surprise visits from people in matching shirts. The HOA that once barked orders was suddenly silent. But the story didn't end there. Because soon, they'd try one last desperate move, something I never thought even they would be bold enough to attempt. It was early morning when I saw it. 2 unmarked trucks parked right at the edge of my ranch, just past the old fence line that borders their neighborhood. I don't usually get too bothered by strange vehicles. Living out here, you learn to expect the occasional lost delivery or a utility crew checking lines. But these trucks weren't from the power company. I watched from the porch as 5 people stepped out. 3 of them were wearing reflective vests, but none had a company logo. One had a clipboard. The other 2? They were holding measuring tools. I didn't move right away. I wanted to see what they were doing before stepping in. They started marking the grass with orange spray paint, dragging tape measures across the ground, and walking the perimeter like they were planning a construction project. One of them even took a shovel and stuck it into the dirt. Not on their side of the line, but mine. I walked down slowly. Calm, steady pace. Hat low. Hands in my pockets. Morning, I said. They turned around quick, like they'd been caught stealing. One of them, probably the one in charge, smiled a little too big and said, "Hey there, sir. We're just doing a site check. Nothing to worry about." I asked, "A site check for what, exactly?" He glanced at the others, then said, "Future community expansion. The HOA has some long-term plans for development." I raised my eyebrow. On my land? He hesitated, then tried to play it off like it was some kind of misunderstanding. Said the property lines were unclear, and that the HOA had submitted new boundary proposals to the county. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to bully me anymore. They were trying to steal it. See, their neighborhood had filled every last lot. The HOA wanted to expand the walking trail, build a second park, maybe even a new parking area. But they didn't have the land for it. And instead of negotiating like adults, or respecting the boundaries, they thought they could just act like it already belonged to them. I didn't say much in that moment. I just told them to leave. They pushed back a little, but when I mentioned I was calling the sheriff again, they packed up faster than they arrived. But I wasn't done. I went straight to the county records office that same afternoon. And just as I suspected, they'd submitted a proposal to redraw the zoning lines. It was buried under some technical paperwork, filed under community enhancement, and it listed my land as vacant buffer space available for annexation. It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. They were trying to rezone part of my ranch without notifying me directly. Hoping, I guess, that it would slide through the system quietly and that I'd never notice. But they underestimated just how involved I am with my land and how connected I am in this county. I didn't just file an objection. I made it loud. I submitted a formal response, hired a zoning lawyer, and scheduled a public hearing. I also filed a complaint for trespassing and unauthorized surveying. Then I called the sheriff myself and handed over the photos I took of their trucks on my land. The next week, a citation was issued to the HO, personal liability for illegal entry and attempted land encroachment. I made sure the hearing was open to all homeowners in the neighborhood. I wanted them to hear it from the officials themselves, not just whispered gossip in Facebook groups. On the day of the hearing, the HOA president didn't even show up. But the vice president did, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. The county clerk read off everything: the fake rezoning attempt, the unauthorized development claims, the trespass, the survey violations. The lawyer I brought barely had to speak. Most of the damage was already documented. Homeowners sat in the back, whispering, confused and angry. I recognized a few faces from when they'd walked their dogs past my fence like they owned the place. Now they were looking at me like they just realized they were standing on a house of cards. And it was starting to crumble. After the hearing, one of the HOA board members caught up to me in the parking lot. He was quiet, didn't say much at first. Then he asked, "Why didn't you just tell us from the beginning?" I looked him in the eye and said, "Because I was never your problem until you decided to make me one." And right then I could tell, they finally understood who they'd been messing with. But what came next? That was when things truly got out of hand. It started with a knock at my front gate just after sundown. Not the kind of knock you ignore either. It was sharp, fast, and repeated like whoever was out there was either nervous or angry, or both. I turned on the floodlight and walked out, expecting maybe a neighbor or another deputy. But it was the HOA president. The same guy who'd sent the original letter months ago. The one who stood on my land acting like he had any say over what I built or parked here. He looked tired, dressed in a wrinkled button-down and khakis, like he'd come straight from a failed meeting. He didn't speak right away. Just stood there shifting from foot to foot. I crossed my arms. "Didn't expect to see you out here." He cleared his throat. "I think we've all misunderstood a few things." I almost laughed. After months of complaints, fake legal threats, trespassing, a failed rezoning attempt, and calling the sheriff on me? Now it was a misunderstanding? I didn't respond. He continued, "We want to make things right. The board is willing to work something out. Maybe even adjust some of the lease terms, if you're open to it." Now that was rich. After trying everything they could to push me off my own land, they were now offering to adjust the lease they never even bothered to understand? I just looked at him for a moment, then said, "You don't adjust the terms of something you don't control." That seemed to knock the wind out of him. He sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and finally said what I figured he came to say all along. "We want to buy the land." I blinked. He added, "Not all of it, just the part the neighborhood sits on. The HOA's been under pressure since you raised the lease, and homeowners are threatening to sue the board. If we can get the land deed outright, we could lower dues again, maybe restore some peace." I let that sit for a second. They still didn't get it. It wasn't just about the land. It was about how they treated people. The arrogance. The entitlement. The way they thought anyone not part of their little circle was beneath them. They didn't care about peace until their wallets felt the pressure. And even now, they weren't apologizing. They were negotiating out of fear. I told him I'd think about it. That was enough to send him on his way, hopeful, maybe even thinking he was making progress. But I didn't think long. The next morning, I drafted a counteroffer. I didn't just ask for a fair price. I added conditions, strict ones. They'd pay not only the purchase price but also cover every legal fee I'd accumulated. They'd issue a formal apology in writing, to me and to the county, for the false claims and trespassing. And they'd dissolve their current HOA board before closing. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. I sent the offer through my lawyer. It was delivered on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, my phone lit up with messages, emails, Even a letter slid under my gate from one of the homeowners begging me to reconsider. Turns out, the HOA president had gone into panic mode again. He told residents that unless I accepted a reasonable offer, their dues would triple. People were furious. Half of them didn't even know about the land situation until now. A few even stopped me on the road, trying to ask if I was really going to kick them out. That was never my plan. But it was never going to be on their terms either. That weekend, I held a private meeting. Not with the HOA board, but with the homeowners. I invited 10 of them. Just folks I'd seen around who seemed decent, not the loudmouths from the board. We sat under the big oak tree behind my barn. I told them the full story. From the day that clipboard showed up at my gate to the zoning hearing. By the end, no one said a word. One woman finally broke the silence and asked, "What happens now?" I looked her in the eye and said, "That depends. If folks want to live here peacefully, that's fine by me. But no more power trips. No more threats. And no more forgetting who owns what." They nodded. And I could tell, this wasn't just some drama anymore. This was about to change everything. About a week after that backyard meeting, things around the neighborhood got real quiet. The board stopped sending letters. Nobody tried walking onto my property. Even the usual joggers who passed by my fence every morning stopped making eye contact. It was like the whole place had hit pause, waiting to see what I'd do next. Then something happened I hadn't expected. The vice president of the HO, the one who tried to act tough at the zoning hearing, showed up at my gate with a man in a suit. Lawyer, no doubt. But this one wasn't aggressive. He was polite, even professional. They didn't come to threaten or argue. They came with papers. A new offer. This time, they didn't just want to buy the land. They wanted to turn over the HOA leadership entirely and hand me a seat at the table. Said it would give both sides a voice and keep everything from blowing up any further. Now that one really made me pause. These were the same people who, just a few weeks ago, wanted me fined, evicted, and probably run out of town. And now they were offering me power over the very board that tried to destroy me? I didn't give them an answer right then. Instead, I took a drive. Sometimes when the weight of all this mess builds up, I drive down to the edge of my ranch. There's an old wooden bench facing west, just beyond the tree line, with a view of the whole valley. That day, I sat there for a good hour, thinking about how fast this had all spiraled. It started with a silly complaint about a barn. And now here I was, sitting on legal leverage, lease control, and a community that had turned against its own leadership out of fear. They'd built a little empire on assumptions, and when those assumptions cracked, everything shook. I wasn't interested in running a neighborhood. I didn't care about HOA elections or pool hours or flowerbed rules. I just wanted peace on my land. But what I couldn't ignore anymore was how far some people would go when they think you don't matter, when they think you're easy to push around. The next day, I met with their lawyer. I told him I wasn't joining any board. But I had a counter-proposal. The HOA would formally release any future claims or influence over any portion of my ranch. No more letters, no more rules, no more boundaries drawn in their imagination. In return, I'd lower the land lease slightly, not back to the original rate, but enough to keep homeowners from revolting. I'd do it in writing as a gesture of good faith. But that wasn't all. I wanted a clause inserted into their charter that no board member could pursue external land purchases or zoning requests without a full neighborhood vote. No more backroom deals. If they wanted to grow, they'd need every homeowner to sign off first. It wasn't about control. It was about making sure no one ever did to someone else what they tried to do to me. They didn't like it. The lawyer hesitated, said it would take time, said the board might reject it. I said, "Take your time. But every week you wait, the lease stays where it is." That got things moving. By the end of the month, I got a call from one of the homeowners I'd spoken to under that oak tree. Said they'd voted. Not just on the new rules, but to replace the entire board. Fresh faces, no power plays, no old grudges. A younger guy named Marcus came to introduce himself. Said he grew up in the area, didn't like how the old board handled things, and wanted to change the way they did business. He asked if we could sit down and talk, man to man. So we did. No suits, no lawyers, just two neighbors with coffee at a picnic table. He asked questions. He listened. He didn't act like he knew everything. And most of all, he didn't try to hide behind titles or bylaws. I told him the truth. I don't hate neighborhoods. I don't even hate HOAs. But I do hate bullies. And what his board did, calling the cops, lying about boundaries, treating me like a problem just because I didn't fit their idea of a perfect view, that wasn't just wrong, it was personal. He nodded. Said it wouldn't happen again. And for the first time in a long while, I almost believed someone.